we get our tests back?
I haven't finished grading them yet, and I'm working on it, but hopefully by tomorrow I'll get them back. I hope so. All right, so really quickly on 29.3, we talked about some of the sense organs, eyes, ears, nose. Skin we have not talked about yet. Today we'll talk about skin. And so there are mechanical receptors which detect pressure on skin. And so it can give you light touch or heavy touch. So some of them are deep in the skin down here, and that would give you heavy touch or heavy pressure. And actually you can see one right here. Then for lighter touch, you have receptors that are near the surface. So when the skin is pressed down lightly, the light touch ones are fired and you can sense a light touch. But heavier touch down here, they're only triggered if you have a heavier pressure on your skin. Yes, Lizzie.
So you feel light pressure before you feel pain. Why is the pain closer to the skin?
Yeah, so the pain would only trigger if you have cell damage.
Okay.
And so you can have pressure, which would not necessarily cause cell damage, but pain would be when you're having cell damage.
Okay.
Yes. And so when cells are damaged, they give out chemicals, and those chemicals then trigger nerves to say that there's damage, and that is what you feel as pain. So if you're to scratch your skin hard enough, you've then damaged those areas and you're going to feel pain from the scratching. But if you just press down your skin, the pain won't be triggered unless you have cells being damaged. Okay, so pain, whether it's because of being cut, whether it's because of being burned, or because of extreme cold, those all result in cell damage. And so you experience pain for any of those things. Extreme hot and cold on your skin feels the same. In both cases, your skin is being destroyed. And you feel pain for both of those. So pain receptors respond to extreme heat or cold, extreme pressure. And they also respond to chemicals the cells release when they are damaged. So while it shows pain at the very top, you have pain receptors throughout your entire skin. I mean, you do have a lot on the surface. And that's why, skinning having a cut or a scrape across your skin surface can be incredibly painful because you have a lot of pain receptors near the skin surface. And so that can be more painful than a deeper cut. Oh, sorry. And the last one, thermoreceptors, they detect temperature. And so some would be detecting hot, some would be detecting cold. And those would be fired, not always with temperature. Other chemicals can make them fire too. Like I mentioned before, peppers, for example, hot peppers. They feel hot in your mouth because they activate heat receptors in your mouth. And so they artificially, by the chemicals, lower the threshold for heat. And so the mouth activates the heat receptors at a colder temperature, in the 80s versus in the hundreds. And so 80 degrees would feel like 100 degrees in your mouth when you have peppers in your mouth. And so that's why if you were to eat a pepper and then drink hot coffee, it's going to feel very hot because the threshold is about 20 degrees colder, and you're going to feel the pain of 20 degrees added on to the hot coffee. And then reverse would be true for things like mint. And so with mint, the chemicals in mint activate the cold receptors. And so that makes them fired at higher temperatures than normal. And so if you were to have mint and then drink ice water, it's going to feel 20, 30 degrees colder than normal because they're activated at a higher temperature than normal. And so that's why some things feel cold, other things feel hot. When in reality, your mouth is not any hotter or colder. You eat a mint, your mouth does not cool down temperature-wise. It feels like it. Same thing with the pepper. Your mouth doesn't heat up with the pepper. It just feels like it. Alcohol would also have a similar effect. So people say alcohol burns in their mouth. It's for the same reason as peppers burn your mouth. The chemical in alcohol also activates heat receptors. Rubbing alcohol, you might have noticed before, if you have in your skin, it burns your skin. And that's because it activates Z receptors on your skin. So that's in 29.3. I wanted to do really quickly go on to 29.5 before we go on to the chapter review, or sorry, not the chapter review, the final exam review. We won't have a test over this, but it will be on the final. No, it's not. It's not long. We'll go through it quickly. So I wanted to talk today about how scientists look at brain functioning, and chemicals change how the brain functions. Oh, sorry. So caffeine, for example, is a chemical that affects brain functioning. And caffeine actually helps your focus. It in small amounts, it can make you have more energy. It can make your brain more active. It can also increase your athletic performance, how you have stronger endurance. So caffeine can make your brain function better. It can help prevent Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's. But other drugs can harm your brain functioning. Drugs like alcohol, for example, in large amounts can inhibit your brain from functioning properly. There are three main ways we can study the brain functioning. We don't have to worry about that slide as far as writing it down. We'll go into this one. So there are three common ways to measure the brain functioning. A CAT scan or CT scan, MRI, and PET scan. So for CT, it uses X-rays, and that lets you see the structure of the brain. And so you're able to see the tissue. If there were things like a tumor, you could see a tumor on the CAT scan. If you have a contusion, a brain injury, or you have brain bleeding or bruising, you can see that in a CAT scan. So this would be good if you want really fast results. If you just had a head injury, for example, or you have a really severe headache and you're in a lot of pain, they can use a CAT scan to look to see if there's any tissue damage or if there's any tumors. MRIs take longer, and so they're more detailed, and so they're better to use. You can see a lot more detail in the brain, but they take a lot longer to get a good MRI scan, more like an hour to an hour and a half, where a CAT scan is just a matter of seconds. So CAT scans are used if you want really fast results, like if you had an injury. MRIs would be, ones that you want a better detailed picture, but ones where you can wait some time to get the results. And then a PET scan would be used to show the activity in the brain. So that would be a way to confirm cancer, for example. PET scans are used to confirm that you do have cancer. So you would see tumors in the brain, but to know if they're cancerous or not, one way to detect that would be using a PET scan. Because what a PET scan does, you get radioactive glucose, and your cells use glucose. They glow with radioactivity. And so the cells that are being used the most are going to glow the brightest. So the ones that are this color right here that look like white, they're the ones that are most active. Blue is the least active cells. A tumor would have high activity, and it would be the most active anywhere in the brain. And so that would be good evidence of a brain tumor if you have one blob that's incredibly active. Yeah, Bella?
What is MRI stand for?
Magnetic resonance imaging. It's a giant magnet. And so basically your body becomes magnetized. And that's where we get the image of the MRI. CAT scan's an X-ray. In a PET scan, you're using radioactive glucose to see it glow under the screen. You can also use a PET scan to look at Alzheimer's patients to see, what parts of the brain are not working correctly. Depression or schizophrenia can show up on the scans, bipolar disorder. And so it lets you see how the brain is functioning and see if there's a part of the brain that's not working properly. So if you have a change in brain chemistry, if you don't have the right amount of neurotransmitters, you can have an illness. Different neurotransmitters relate to different functions. As mentioned before, things like serotonin, for example, controls your appetite, controls your well-being. It gives you a sense of peace. Low serotonin, you're going to feel really sad, and you're not going to be able to do the normal things you usually do. You might have low appetite too with low serotonin. Yeah.
If you Can you take like a pill of that and then like you'll be more hungry?
A pill of serotonin?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. Now that would be really dangerous though, unless it's really well regulated, because too much serotonin also is going to become a problem. So you want to make sure you have the right amount, because too much you could be poisoned from that too. But yeah, the right amount is important. So too much or too low, you're going to feel really bad. And depression, usually, lots of times you don't have any appetite because of low serotonin levels. And then dopamine is a reward chemical. It tells you to keep on doing certain things and rewards you for doing things that are good for you, like eating, for example, exercising. And so things like serotonin and dopamine stimulate responses. Serotonin tells you to eat, for example. Dopamine rewards you and tells you to keep on doing the things you're doing that are good for you. Some prevent impulses, like Gaba, for example, is a neurotransmitter that's released when you're going to sleep. And it makes you relax. It makes your muscles relax. And you probably have had this before, where you're about to go to sleep and you feel like you're falling and you jolt up in bed. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you're right about to sleep and you feel like you're falling and it's like a moment of panic. Well, what's happening there is GABA has relaxed your muscles, but your body is still conscious. And that feeling of relaxation is not natural to your body. Your body thinks that if it feels that way, it must be falling, because you don't consciously usually feel that. Usually you're asleep at that point. And so if you have that happening, your muscles are totally relaxed, but you're still conscious. And that's what you feel as that falling sensation. And that's what GABA does. So if you have too much or too little of a neurotransmitter, you're going to have a disorder. Schizophrenia is related to too much dopamine in the brain. And you can see right here the high amounts of brain activity in certain parts. Schizophrenia, the disorder is basically psychosis, where you just don't see things that are real. You either hear voices, you see things that aren't real, you have delusions, you might think that you're reincarnated, you might feel like, you might think that you are Elvis, for example. Basically, though, you have these ideas that are not based in reality. That's what schizophrenia is you either make believe things or you see or hear things that aren't real. Parkinson's would be too little dopamine. So if you have too much too little, you get brain disorders. Parkinson's, it's hard to control your functions. Parkinson's, one common aspect of it is shaking your hands, especially a lot. But basically, they just lose their functioning of the nervous system with Parkinson's. And then depression, too little serotonin. So you can see with depression, you have decreased brain activity. The red is the most active sites, blue is the least active sites. And you can see with depression, you have little brain activity compared to a normal brain. Addiction would be the need for a substance. Basically, when you take certain drugs that are not good for you, your brain becomes rewired. Your brain acts differently than it usually does. And it can only become normal with that drug. If you remove the drug from the brain, you actually feel abnormal. So the drug actually makes your body change to crave the drug, because that's how you feel normal at that point. You can't feel normal without the drug anymore. So that's what addiction is what you cannot function without the drug. And then tolerance would be when you need more and more of the drug for the same effect. So it can even be for things like caffeine. Some people with caffeine, they start with 1 cup of coffee and that's enough to get them through the day. But then over time, they might need 2 cups to have the same effect before they get sleepy. And so tolerance would be, you need more of the same drug to get the same effect. So certain drugs can lead to desensitization or sensitization. And that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. Those are what those images represent. So the top picture shows you a normal neuron. So you have the axon terminal right here going to the dendrite. These are neurotransmitters going across the synapse. This could be serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, GABA, any kind of neurotransmitters going across here. This would be the normal amount of receptors in green and neurotransmitter. But certain drugs would increase the amount of neurotransmitters, like cocaine, for example, caffeine, that would increase the amount of neurotransmitter going across the synapse. In response to that, there's less receptors made. So the body is trying to act normal. In response to a drug, the body's trying to rewire to make it act normal. So what will it do? If you have too many neurotransmitters, it can remove some receptors, and that will make the same activity as without the more neurotransmitters. So this would be desensitization, where your body removes transmitters, removes receptors for the transmitters. But that can be really dangerous, because if you remove the drug completely, then you're going to have less neurotransmitters, you're going to have less receptors, you're going to feel really bad. So that's desensitization, is that middle one right there. Sensitization is just the opposite, where certain drugs can lead to less neurotransmitters, like you can see here, just a few purple dots. And if you have less neurotransmitters, in response to that, the body is going to make more receptor sites to try to increase the activity. So this would be for depressants, things like alcohol, for example, drugs that make you sleepy. That would be this instance down here, where you have less neurotransmitters, you have less activity. So in order to make it more active, the body makes more receptors. So certain alcoholics can actually have this happen to them, or even a little bit of alcohol can make a huge effect on them.
So if you want to like unaddict someone, then do you just like slowly take them off of it?
Yes, that's usually the best approach. I mean, it depends on the kind of drug you're talking about, but usually that's going to be better than to just stop completely. That can be very, very awful for a person. Or what you can do in a hospital situation is just give them other chemicals that can help mitigate the effects of the withdrawal. But withdrawal for certain drugs can be incredibly hard to go through because of the intense effects. Now, even caffeine can be hard to withdraw from. Even with caffeine, you might have experienced this yourself. If you have a cup of coffee one day and next day you don't have coffee, you usually have a headache. You usually feel very sleepy. You don't feel like yourself. But then the body adjusts. And that's just a very mild drug, but more like drugs like alcohol, for example, or even harder drugs like cocaine or heroin, they have a huge withdrawal where you're going to need to be hospitalized to go through the withdrawal, or even under a coma in certain situations. It's just so painful. The body has to either have that drug and slowly get off that drug, or be in a hospital situation where they can give other medicine that can help them get through the withdrawal period. It can be very, very difficult. So the body in all these situations is trying to make it go back to normal. And if you misuse a drug, then the body tries to make the abnormal the normal. The abnormal would be this or this. And the body tries to adjust the abnormal situation to make it normal. And which would mean if you stop taking the drug, then you're going to be abnormal again. And so addicts would be ones that can only act normally with the drug. Yeah.
So does the street drug, so it stands for dopamine?
The street, dope. No, I don't know how that came about. I think it's just a coincidence. I don't think they knew about dopamine back when they started talking about dope. I don't know how that started. I think it just comes from the word that just means like stupid. I think that's really where it comes from, and that it makes you look stupid or act stupidly. Because usually with dope, like it just like it calms you down, it slows you down, where you just like don't really talk, you don't like you're not really active or engaged with other people. I think that's more of where it comes from. Is that just makes you like a dope, because that's what they call people who were dumb. Like not so much anymore, but I think that's where it comes from. I have to check and see to make sure, but it's not from dopamine. I don't think they knew about dopamine. It's a pretty new thing about dopamine. So I don't think that's anything to do with it. But drugs do cause dopamine to be increased, and that makes you feel good. That's how you get addicted to drugs, it's from dopamine. But I don't think that has anything to do with it. Stimulants, things like caffeine. Caffeine's a stimulant, cocaine's a stimulant, meth is a stimulant. These are drugs that cause more activity to go on in your brain. And so they can cause more action potentials, more activity in the neurons, That can make you feel more energetic, can make you feel happier, more talkative, more social. They can have good effects, but they can also have very bad effects depending on how much you have and the kind of drug that you're using. So meth, for example, is a drug that will increase the neurotransmitters in a synapse. So meth would increase these pink dots right here and just add more of them in the synapse.
Wait, what do neurotransmitters do?
So these are chemicals right here, these dots right here, that give the signal across this. They basically increase the signal. The signal goes across and it makes it go to the other neuron. So with more neurotransmitters, you're going to get a stronger signal. It's going to be more active in the brain. Others like cocaine will decrease the removal of the neurotransmitter. So cocaine blocks this right here. So the neurotransmitter comes out, but it can't go back in this way. It makes it go forward. It makes it increase the signal forward.
So, like, if you like take coffee on a regular basis, you it decreases the neurotransmitter for that.
So usually with caffeine, what it would do, it's a little bit different. It's kind of complex how this works with caffeine. But the big thing that happens with caffeine is that there is a neurotransmitter that makes you sleepy. It's called adenosine. And what caffeine will do is it blocks the adenosine sites. And so you can't get adenosine going to your neurons and your brain doesn't slow down. And so caffeine blocks the sleepy neurotransmitter and that keeps you awake. In response to that, the body makes more receptors for the sleepy neurotransmitter, which means if you stop having coffee, you get very, very sleepy. Because now you have a lot of these green receptors for the sleepy neurotransmitter. And that's generally how coffee works. Now, of course, you also have adrenaline in the brain. And that would be more of this, where you do have more neurotransmitters right here, more adrenaline secreted. So that could also happen. But the main effect of caffeine is having the sleepy neurotransmitter blocked. Yeah, Lucy.
What is that green and yellow thing that's inside?
Oh, this right here. So that is a channel that brings neurotransmitters back this way. It's called reuptake. So that would decrease the amount of neurotransmitters in the synapse. So that would decrease the signal. Cocaine blocks the reuptake, which means that it enhances the signal going across. It makes your brain more active. So it's a stimulant, just like caffeine. Cocaine is like a very strong caffeine.
Would caffeine be considered bad for you?
In moderate amounts, it's actually good for you. It's been shown to help with brain health, athletic ability, focusing. So the amount of caffeine we have in coffee is actually pretty good. Now, if you add a lot of sugar to coffee, that becomes bad. But the coffee itself has been shown to actually have a lot of health benefits.
Would also like, so you said that when like say you like have caffeine, it makes the sleep things.
Yeah.
more. Would they go away after you're done having caffeine?
Yeah, so like if you were to have like a cup of coffee one day, it's going to build up more receptors. You then stop that caffeine use. After a few days, it goes back to normal. It removes those receptors that were there. Others, depressants, cause you to slow down. Your brain slows down, makes you sleepy with depressants.
So you know the medicine that you can take for having like to focus like for
Oh yeah, like Adderall.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when you like don't have an appetite for that, is that like because of other stuff?
An appetite for,
Because like apparently that
oh, it makes,
like it can like you can lose your appetite.
yeah, that's right. So that would interfere with neurotransmitters, which would cause you, so in your brain, it tells you to eat, basically. And so it interferes with the neurotransmitters that make you want to eat. And so that's why. So yeah, weight loss would be one effect of Adderall use because it makes your brain more active, it makes you burn more calories, and also decreases your ability to want to eat. And that's to do with the neurotransmitters going across the synapses. And so it makes you have less of those, and you don't want to eat as much.
So like I've heard that you think that everything's gross. Like if you ate it the day before and didn't take it, then like you would be fine eating it, but it just like your appeal for food
Yeah.
is just like you just want to throw up because
Yeah, you just don't. That's right. Yeah, and that's a pretty severe reaction. I mean, usually it's not that severe. If it's that severe, the doctor might want to adjust the dose. It usually isn't that much. I mean, that's pretty severe, but it can be less where you just eat less than normal. But for it to have all food taste gross, that's pretty bad. That usually shouldn't happen. So people might want to like adjust the dose if that's a common side effect of that. But yeah, I mean, definitely if you adjust your brain chemistry, you can, that can change your eating habits and change your metabolism, how that works too.
You said if you have too little serotonin, that depression, what if you have too much?
Yeah, so that would cause other problems, and that can be very serious. You can have heart attacks. You can feel very irritable. You can feel panicky. So it's a very serious condition with too much serotonin. And usually it's pretty deadly. So it's not as common because it usually doesn't, you usually can't survive if it's too high for too long. So depressants like alcohol, for example, slow you down. You feel more relaxed. Your brain works more slowly. Marijuana would also be a depressant, and so it also decreases brain activity. And I can do it in two ways. It can produce neurotransmitters that prevent impulses. So things like Gaba, for example, can slow down your brain. It can make more Gaba to make you relax more. Or it can slow down the release of neurotransmitters that generate impulse. So it can stop the release of acetylcholine, which makes you active, makes your muscles move, or dopamine, for example, which makes you want to do things. So it can stop those, which would make you stop wanting to do things, stop wanting to move around and be active. So that's how depressants work. So depressant in this case just means to get things lower, to lower your heart rate, to make you not as active. That's what, it doesn't make you feel physically depressed. I mean, it can, but that's not really what they're talking about. They're not talking about being sad. They're talking about just things being lower in activity. All right, so that's into 29.5. What I'm going to do today is give out your study guides for the final exam. We won't have a test on 29, but we will have it on the final exam. So let me give out the one. So the copy machine